Well, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, or super intelligent shades of the colour sky blue pink, whatever you identify as, you're all welcome here, and we make no judgments, of course. Today, my very special guest is Nayiri, and she has quite some experience regarding type 1 diabetes, etc., etc. So I'm going to shut up for a bit, and she's going to tell us all about it, and then she's got some questions for me. So, go for it.
Hi, everyone. Hello, Bart, and thank you for inviting me to the channel. Okay. Well, my experience with type 1, I actually have lifetime experience with type 1 diabetes because I don't remember life before I was diagnosed. I was diagnosed at age 5. So that was 46 years ago now. So I'm quite a veteran type 1 diabetic. Your viewers might be interested to hear that I'm ex-vegetarian, transitioned to a carnivore ketovore diet in 2020. So I'm 4 years into it. And that was the best thing I did for my overall health, not just diabetes, but overall nutrition and health. Okay, so I transitioned to low carb before transitioning to meat eating, but low carbohydrates solved many issues, health issues. However, introducing meat was unmatched, unparalleled. Okay, so what do? I have a community online. I work as a coach. I help people lose weight, maybe come off their medications. I basically help people, coach them to transition onto a lower carbohydrate diet. I also have a group for type 1 diabetics on Facebook for type 1 diabetics who not only follow low carbohydrate diet, but who also do fasting, whether it's intermittent or extended. And some of us have done 5-day fast, including myself, and I have a blog about it on my website. So I'm delighted to be here. I don't know how many type 1s there are in your community, but from the comments, I occasionally read comments on type 1 diabetes. So I assume there are some type 1s following you.
Yeah, absolutely. Notable examples would be Dr. Ryan Attar, who's type 1, who's quite vocal around the community, which is good. And certainly others. I mean, there are many, I think, type 1 diabetics that do follow a meat-based, carnivorous-based approach to managing their condition. What kind of kickback are you getting? What kind of pushback are you getting? How many people are coming along telling you how wrong you are to be suggesting such a thing and all of that?
Well, I think that the pushback initially came, which isn't surprising, but initially came from my diabetes consultant. I'm from the UK, so we don't have endos, but we have diabetes consultants who are, of course, specialized in endocrinology, but we just call them diabetes consultants. Now, initially, she told me it was 2015. Not many people had heard of a low carbohydrate diet, and certainly my diabetes consultant hadn't. So when I happily reported back that my A1C was no longer 9.2 or 9.8, it had come down to 6.8 for the very first time in my life. She asked me what I was doing, and I said, well, I've lowered my carbohydrates. And she was horrified. I think this was 2015, must have been. And she looked at me and she said, Nayiri, you're still young. And if you're ever considering having another baby, you must eat carbohydrates. And of course, I think that was a blessing in disguise, because I came home and I started researching whatever I could find at the time online, whether there was any truth in that, and I couldn't find. And in fact, I came across Jason Fung's videos and Dr. Bernstein's videos a few years later. So I found out that was total nonsense. There's absolutely no truth in that. You need carbohydrates to fall pregnant. In fact, now so many years on now we know that quite the opposite is true, actually. We know Dr. Kills from our carnivore community, right? He recommends people go on a carnivore diet to address their infertility issues. He uses carnivore diet as part or one of the interventions. So that was the pushback. Now, however, I'm lucky. There is a lot of pushback online. In fact, there's a lot of pushback against generally, not carnivore, but generally lower carbohydrate diets. And it baffles me. I really cannot understand. So this is why I don't get involved in arguments. It's not my job. I don't think it's my job to convince anyone else to change their diet. If they're willing to change their diet, I'm here. I can tell them how I did it. In fact, one of the hardest transitions for me was introducing meat, because I've been vegetarian since age 19. So pretty much close to 30 years of not eating meat and fish. So suddenly transitioning into a meat-based diet, that was the toughest thing I've ever done in my entire life. Not lowering the carbohydrates, that wasn't tough. I thought that was very easy. The easiest thing to do was not eating pasta, was not eating pastries. And, I couldn't care less about those. And of course, it helped that I didn't have addictive behavior towards those foods. But it was damn hard starting to eat meat. I remember the first bite of bacon. My husband actually crumbled a piece of bacon into tiny crumbs and mixed it into my eggs. And even then, I kind of complained that the bits were too big. And I sat down at the table and I wept like a child. It was very difficult. So I always tell people, I know it sounds like a cliche, but I always tell people, if I did it after 30 years, so can you. It just takes determination. And when your health reaches a point when you're missing essential nutrients, and the supplements I used to take did not help, you don't have any other choice. So I got away with it for 30 years. But I was taking some supplements. They weren't doing anything, nothing. So I was wasting money on all those supplements. So eating it was the toughest thing for me. You asked about pushback. Within the type 1 community, there is a lot of pushback against those of us who do not eat carbohydrates. I try not to be forceful. Whenever I'm passing a message, I don't really sound like this is the only way and everyone should do it this way. I think it helps. So I put out my blood sugar levels online. Have a look. This is what I'm doing, and this is the result. So you might want to try. If you tell people what they're doing is wrong, I don't think it works. I mean, my diabetes nurse would tell me when I was carb eater, because I was told to eat carbs and take as much insulin as I could and cover the carbohydrates, as if everything would work like magic. My diabetes nurse looked at me as a failure and told me I wasn't doing it right or I was doing it wrong. And I don't want to pass that feeling on, you're a failure because, you're not doing it right. You show them the way. And I think that's a good way. The only pushback we get is when we are more forceful in our message, saying this is the only way and this is how everyone should do it. Awesome. I'm very diplomatic. I'm very diplomatic online.
Right, fair enough. I've not ever been accused of being very diplomatic online myself, personally. That's not my style, at least not online. People often think that goes into the real world as well, though, and that's the personality of the person that, really? Do you
But to be fair, this is why we follow you. We like you for that.
Right, well, some people don't like it, believe it or not. I can't understand why. I think it's great fun. But anyway, yes, it is a caricature. It is a bit of the grumpy professor act. Anyone that knows me in real life would probably give you a different description. But anyway, it's not about me today. It's about you and your group and stuff. The Facebook group, how many subscribers, followers, whatever they call themselves, have you got there?
I started with only one member, and that was myself.
We all start groups that way, of course. Yep.
I wanted to do a 5-day fast. Now, you might be familiar with Dr. Ian Lake from the UK. Now, he's a type 1 diabetic, and he enrolled with another type 1 diabetic. They enrolled in a study where that was called 0-5-100. So they had to be fasted for 5 days. There were 8 or 7 participants in total. Only 2 of them were type 1 diabetics on insulin, obviously. So they had to walk or jog 20 miles per day over 5 days, totally fasted. And their ketones along the way were measured, blood pressure, weight. They took all sorts of detailed measurements. And in fact, they published a paper which was reviewed by Dr. Eric Westman. And so when I read that and I heard that, I thought, I want to try that too. I started posting on Facebook in various different groups, diabetes groups, including type 1 diabetes groups. Is anyone out there crazy enough to be doing extended fast? And I was threatened to be banned from those groups because I was told, oh, that's a very dangerous message. You shouldn't encourage, fasting, or type 1s cannot do. Type 2 diabetics can absolutely fast. Type 1 diabetics should not fast. But I knew it could be done because Ian Lake and Dr. John Furness, who were the participants, they did it, and they reported back lowering their insulin, and they only resorted to having glucose tabs to save themselves from a hypoglycemic sort of event, only a few times over the 5 days. So they were basically extremely healthy. They stayed well hydrated. They were energetic. And if you looked at their blood sugar results and ketone results, by the way, comparing them with the results of the other participants, you could not spot the type 1 diabetic in there. You couldn't. They were very similar. So seeing that study, in fact, Ian Lake kindly shared it with me before it was published. And so I knew it could be done. So I was banned and threatened not to post such messages in groups. I thought, okay, I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to create a group on Facebook, and then I'll just get into my group and just write daily reports in there about what I'm doing. I also published it on my website as a blog. And if anyone joins, at least there is something in there, some post to go by, and we can compare experiences. And before I knew it, 100 people had joined. I think we're close to 500 now. So I'm very selective. I only allow people who are already following a low carbohydrate diet and who are doing some form of fasting. And I'm very passionate about it because I get irritated. So many people who pretend they're scientists, right, irritate you. So I just so understand that irritation, because I get so frustrated when we are told this particular thing, whatever that may be, physical activity or diet change or whatever, you cannot do it because you are type 1 diabetic. I agree. Precautions need to be taken, and fasting is not a game. If you are fasting, you have to reduce your insulin. Every type 1 who's managing their insulin intake and their diet, and we do day-to-day management. In fact, hour-to-hour management. You can't take your eyes off your figures and your diet. You can't just let go of it and pretend you're not diabetic for 1 hour, because there are repercussions, right? So every type 1 who's responsibly taking care of their health knows that if they are not eating, they're going to reduce their insulin. But it is nice to have a support group where you can just ask people, how did you do the first one? Now, I am low and I'm in the middle of my halfway through my 2-day fast. Do I just take a glucose tablet and continue the fast, or do I just call it a day and just start eating because now I've dropped low? And I always tell them, no, treat your low, take just enough glucose pill or glucose tablets or glucose drink for that matter to bring yourself to normal blood sugar level and continue to fast. You don't need to ingest any more food. That's it, because that would definitely break your fast. But if you are treating your hypo, bringing your blood sugar up to normal level, not to a high level where you might require more insulin to bring it back down again, but to normal level, you haven't broken the fast, just continue to fast. And that's so as long as precautions are taken and safety is ensured, hydration is important and salt is important, then type 1 diabetics, just like anyone else, absolutely can do multi-day fasts. They don't have to, but if they want to, they absolutely can.
Awesome. All right. So before we get on to questions from your community for my good self, tell us about any other social media you might have going around where people might find you, subscribe to you, and otherwise titillate your algorithms.
Oh, thank you for that. So I have a Facebook page called Low Carbon Fasting. I'm on Instagram as Low Carbon Fasting, and I have a YouTube channel called Low Carbon Fasting. And of course, the website is lowcarbonfasting.com.
Brilliant. Okay, so those are all the places that folks should absolutely go directly after these fine messages, and make yourselves known there. Obviously, there are some things that you will need to be in order to join the Facebook group, as alluded to. Now, are people who are not themselves type 1 diabetic, are they able to join that group?
Well, if they are carers of type 1 diabetics, they are physicians who want to find out more, who are curious, because there's nothing that I love more than a curious physician, because that's so rare to see, right? Or scientists and researchers, they're very welcome to come and see what we're doing and perhaps, learn something from us.
Awesome. There you go. Equal opportunities. Love it. Love it. All right. Shall we have a look at some of the questions? Apparently, you told your folks that you were going to be on my channel and they said, oh, ask him this and that. So I'm fascinated to hear what this and that is.
I collected some questions actually from my group members. So let me see if I can share my screen. Can you see?
Yeah, there we go. We got you. Brilliant.
Okay. Questions for Prof. Bart Gay. Right. First one. From Amy, actually, she's known to be a very strict carnivore, so she may be in your group. She's everywhere in every carnivore group. Amy Fields Perrin. Now, she's asking if type 1 diabetics can use anything else other than insulin to improve their overall health. I mean, what other direction should we go in? Extremely high fat and very low protein with tiny doses of insulin? I thought that was a good question, but because we know, I mean, initially, look, before the arrival of insulin, type 1 diabetics used to be kept alive, at least for a very short period of time, a few weeks to, I think, just a few months. And eventually they would wither away. But they were fed primarily fat, very low protein, and obviously no carbohydrates. So fat did not seem to need as much insulin, and hence they were kept alive. I think Gary Tobbs also mentions this in his recent book, Rethinking Diabetes. Now, AIM is interested to know if that is something we should do as well to minimize our insulin intake. Should we worry about how much insulin we're taking if it is to cover protein? In fact, I'm really interested about this too, because protein does require insulin more than fat. Should we minimize protein intake? I personally don't. I prioritize protein, A, because it's satiating, and B, because I need it for strong bones, even to protect my organs. You need those muscles, and you're not going to build muscle with fat.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you're reducing the carbohydrates, then it's got to be protein. So I don't minimize my protein at all. I've never made an effort to minimize protein since I've transitioned to meat eating. However, this is a common question. Type 1 diabetics have worked out that they seem to require a lot less insulin when they minimize their protein, and carbohydrate is almost non-existent, and they increase the fat. What are your thoughts?
Okay, well, I mean, there are a lot of threads there. There are a lot of things to pick at, if you like, and to try and find some kind of thematic through it. I think the first thing for me is to, first of all, state that I don't think we are certain that having a lot of insulin is in and of itself necessarily problematic. So minimizing your insulin intake because that's bad, I don't think that's the argument here. I think the argument is that if you need a lot of insulin, that usually indicates that there's too much sugar entering your bloodstream. I think personally that you will struggle to hugely increase your insulin needs with protein in the absence of a lot of carbohydrate. Now, you're probably closer to the mark on this. You would know what these people are talking about in terms of, okay, this protein effect you're talking about, how much does that increase their insulin needs? And is that a bad thing? But how much? Do we know?
Well, I know that with some people, for example, when they lower the protein, their total daily insulin, and we're talking about exogenous insulin here, obviously, so their total could go as low as 8 units per day. That covers their meals and their background insulin. I, for example, I'm now taking 17 units, which again, compared to most other type 1 diabetics, is very little. 17 units in total as my long-acting background insulin and also insulin for my meals. But if 17 is then reduced to 8 or 10 with less protein, it's a dilemma. And I understand why people are tempted to lower the insulin. However, as you said, we don't really know if 10 units per day is any better than 17, especially if weight loss is not the goal.
Yeah. And then the other concern that comes to mind from that is that if your insulin intake is like that instead of maybe like a bit more, hello, now we might be having a problem with our ability to keep electrolytes and to keep our kidney tissues doing what they should and keep our thyroid doing what it should and such. And we might be subject to secondary problems. I don't think we need to avoid insulin per se. There is a daily need for insulin, whether you're type 1 diabetic or not. It does play a role other than purely signaling the uptake of sugar, as we know. Protein as well, for example. It also keeps the kidney tissue viable. It keeps the thyroid function viable, etc., etc., etc. Okay. That said, we can manipulate protein intake, fat intake to have an effect on our insulin requirements. We can also mess around with what form of insulin we're using. Now, I know for a fact that, for example, Dr. Ryan Attar, as mentioned earlier, he runs his glucose level such that his A1C runs at 4.8 and below as a type 1 diabetic. Consistently, persistently, year in and year out, month in and month out. He's using almost none of the quick-acting stuff at all. And he's eating a diet which is rich enough in protein for his needs and enough fat for his needs. So all he's taking is the older, much slower stuff. That's how he's maintaining such stability. So that's something that people can look at. People that want more advice on that should probably contact Dr. Ryan Attar directly and ask him. I know he'd be happy to share what he knows, because at the end of the day, if you can maintain your A1C at 4.8, as far as I'm concerned, you're not a diabetic, even though he absolutely is, because he can't produce any of his own insulin. Another one that I just learned about this morning, actually, from Nayiri herself, because I hadn't heard about it being used for this before, but it's allulose apparently can have an effect on your blood glucose as well. Tell us about that.
No, I don't know how it's working mechanistically. Maybe I should have prepared myself more, because Ben Bickman actually has put out videos, but they're Instagram reels, and they're just such short reels that they barely explain the mechanism behind why allulose, which is a polyol, seems to actually have the power to lower blood sugar.
Right.
I tried it on myself.
Okay.
So I had my dinner followed by dessert, except that in that dessert, I didn't put my erythritol sugar. So I thought, I've got this allulose, I better mix in allulose sugar. And I took my normal dose of insulin, and within 2 hours, I dropped low. I had to treat my hypo. And 2 hours later, I dropped low again. And then through the night, every 2 hours, I kept dropping low. So the next time I had the same dessert, same meal at exactly the same time, 5 p.m. in the evening, I thought I won't take any insulin to cover my meal. I usually require about 3 units, roughly 3 units of insulin to cover my proteins and fats, but mainly the protein. I didn't take any insulin. Initially, I had a rise. Let me call it a bump. Let's be more specific. It's not a rise. It was a bump without rapid-acting insulin, which is what I use. Unlike Dr. Attar, I use rapid-acting because I use a pump. And so I didn't take any insulin. I just wanted to see where it would go. And then eventually, I think it was I've written it somewhere, 2.5 hours, 4 hours later, it started going back to normal again. It just stayed normal. So I didn't seem to require any insulin to cover my meal, but I did not have any hypoglycemic episodes because I hadn't taken insulin. And of course, what drives hypoglycemia is insulin. And that's something that not many people know. It's insulin that drives you into hypoglycemia. People need to realize that. And the larger the dose of insulin you're taking, the higher the chance of you having hypoglycemia. This is what happened to me when I was a carb eater. My blood sugar would rise, and then it would crash, and then it would rise again, and it would crash again. But as it was crashing, I would actually start feeling hypoglycemic at normal levels. Because it's crashing rapidly, you start feeling shaking and dizziness and blurred vision at pretty normal levels, actually. It's interesting. I'd love to look into that. And, people can contact me, and maybe that could be my next research. I like reading up and simplifying information that I personally can understand. Not coming from a scientific background. Actually, my background is linguistics. So that's kind of science. It's science of how the language is constructed, if you like. But allulose is certainly very interesting. Another tool, of course, if I may mention, is myo-inositol. Inositol. So that's been well known. I've used that when I feel like, hey, insulin isn't working now. must have done something. Cortisol levels are probably high. I'm not sleeping too well. And of course, menopausal women will experience like that high need for insulin that could last a full year or two, maybe even longer. So I've used inositol. I don't really know how it's pronounced. Inositol, I've heard both. It didn't really help. So I didn't notice any difference. But it's pretty safe. You can use that, just a teaspoon of it.
Brilliant.
So
All right. All right. There you go, Amy. There's our best shot at question number 1. And yeah, good to see you. And I have seen Amy around all over the place. So yes, awesome. Question number the 2nd.
Okay, this is from Christoph. Not sure if he can answer it, but I'd like to learn about how or if a keto carnivore diet can promote nerve healing. Can someone recover from neuropathy through diet, or is it neuropathy state where they've gone too far already?
Okay. It really depends very much on the underlying etiology, the underpinnings, the cause of the neuropathy, as to whether or not that particular form of neuropathy is likely to be reversible or whether it's likely to be permanent. Example is one I gave you earlier with the dichloroacetate. That can cause neuropathy.
Yeah.
Remove the dichloroacetate, that kind of neuropathy does respond well and come right. If you have neuropathy underpinned by any kind of chronic systemic inflammatory overburden in your system, which is highly likely, actually, that is likely to respond to a carnivore, very low carbohydrate diet, precisely because such a diet is anti-inflammatory along multiple lines at once. And as such, the diet which is demonstrably, clearly, unequivocally most likely to reduce your inflammatory status to the lowest level possible is, it seems, the 100% carnivore diet with no plant material in it, whatever. That's what I promote. Do I follow that myself? Well, 90-something%, but I'm a human being as well, and things come along, and, you know, we fall off the wagon from time to time. I find I suffer hugely when I do that, which is kind of a good thing. People say, well, that's the problem. If there's a problem with carnivore, that's what it is. You can't eat stuff that you shouldn't eat anymore because your body just goes mad. And I go, well, yes, but isn't that a great thing? Because it encourages adherence, really, for people that have any kind of learning curve. Not like me, though. I'll just do it again at some point. It's whatever. So, yeah, it really, to sum up the answer to the question, it really depends what the cause of the neuropathy is. Sometimes when somebody has a health complaint where they've got a degenerative situation of any kind, really, actually, be that neuropathy or anything else, actually including type 1 diabetes to some degree, there is a product available which encourages your stem cells to be released and to do their thing. And of course, it's up on the screen right there. Go and check it out for yourselves. This is a line of nutraceuticals that encourage the release of adult stem cells, which can and do differentiate into new cells of any kind the body needs, according to the body's plan. Your body has its own priorities and will decide what stem cells are used for once you release them. Hence, we make no therapeutic claims. But there you go. There's my little advertisement taken care of for Cerule and its products. Go on.
I'm going to add to that. Actually, was on the site and looking at all the products, and I've already selected 2 products. They're in my cart, and I'm going to do the checkout in a minute. So awesome. I'm very excited to try them out and see. I'll report back to you and see if they actually had any effect on my blood sugar or any other outcomes. So I'm very excited to try the 2 products. There are so many products out there, so I was tempted to try the collagen, marine collagen, but I went for 2 other products. So we'll see. I'm very excited to try those.
All right, very good. And that's about it in terms of neuropathy for me. What in my clinical practice, my day-to-day, I guess, message to almost everybody with almost every condition which seems to be underpinned by inflammation is I have a 5-prong attack on inflammation. I go 100% carnivore diet, or as close to that as you can attain and maintain. There are 3 cereal products I think a person should take on a daily basis. I think that electrical grounding and earthing, they sometimes call it, is a great thing, indicated thing. I tend to block blue light after dark by using amber-coloured lenses, and I undertake an amount of high-intensity burst and repeat or resistance training exercise at the right schedule, etc., which we can talk about on another day. But that's my 5 that generally I say, there's where we go to deal with that. So if a person comes to me with a neuropathy situation, first of all, we try and work out what the cause is and ameliorate that. Second of all, I say, right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that's a fairly standard message. So there it is on that one.
Well, the question was obviously from a type 1 diabetic. So, so the cause was more than likely to have been high blood sugars.
Yes.
And that's typical or classic diabetic neuropathy.
Yeah.
I don't know if there ever is full healing from it or cure, but I have heard people report, even for retinopathy, that the damage seems to improve on a carnivore diet. So, very exciting.
Yep. Cool. So there you go. Anti-inflammatory and maintain your blood sugar. Right. What's next?
Next question. Could you please ask Bart how long it should take for the rise and fall in blood glucose from a protein or fat meal in a non-diabetic? Now, Jonathan is LADA, so he's type 1 diabetic, but diagnosed as an adult, so latent autoimmune type 1 diabetes in adults. So he usually takes bolus to cover the meal, but was wondering what the normal time frame should be. What BG level does he think is harmful related to how long it takes to bring down a bump from protein and fat? Actually, I'm very interested in that question too, because we don't have horrible rises from like you would get with carbohydrates. We don't have like dramatic rises in blood sugar, but we do get a slight bump from protein and the fat, but particularly it's the protein, I think, is the main culprit. So how long can you keep that bump going?
Right.
For me personally, it could take sometimes 4 hours for it to come back down. And because I'm using rapid acting insulin, I'm very careful not to overdose myself, because then what happens is every diabetic knows out there, type 1 diabetic knows, you stack insulin. You stack all the insulin doses, and then eventually you're going to crash. And sometimes I have 4 hours of that bump going. Is that typical for a non-diabetic too?
Well, for me as a non-diabetic, personally, I find that any deviation on the blood glucose curve after a meal tends to resolve by 2 hours. Others that are non-diabetics also talk about, 2 to 4 hours. So the 4 hours is not completely out with the normal pattern on that. Of course, the only difference being that the non-diabetic is producing insulin and releasing it themselves, and the diabetic is injecting it or having it pumped, or whatever the methodology of delivery is. So, that doesn't sound completely out of whack. The other thing to understand is that a period of blood glucose elevation above your ideal or baseline, slightly maybe, not a huge cause of concern, actually. What we also find, even in non-diabetics who take on a carnivore diet for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, is what we actually find is their A1Cs are actually drifting up. And they're hitting 6 and 6.2. And the so-called experts are going, there, see, told you, fat causes insulin resistance. There's your problem. You just need to go on a decent diet of plants and stuff. And I'm like, oh, Jesus, really? Here's the deal. when we say that a person who has a blood glucose level such that their A1C is 6.7, we say that person is now a type 2 diabetic in that case. And we are pathologizing them at that level. However, what we're failing to understand is that that level, 6.7, is their average blood glucose over the last period of time that an A1C test lasts over, right?
Mm-hmm.
There is no evidence extant anywhere in the literature or anywhere else that a person whose blood glucose is 6.5 consistently and persistently all the time is at any risk of serious health problems, glycation problems, the kind of problems associated with diabetes. Well, the kind of problems associated with elevated blood glucose.
Yes.
Okay. The problem, though, is that to get an average of 6.7 when your blood glucose is doing that means that while you have a lot of periods down here, you have a lot of periods up here. This is where the damage is, not down here where the average that's being reported was. So you could happily truck along at 6.5 A1C for decades, I would imagine, without there being a serious problem, so long as your blood glucose doesn't deviate much from that level. So control is where it's at, not necessarily the level itself. Again, I would refer you back to Dr. Ryan Attar on getting it really stable and how he does it. Yeah.
You know, with baseline glucose levels, there are some genetic variations as well, and we know that. So I think we need to understand that too. I was laughing when you mentioned on a carnivore diet, some people find that their A1C goes up. Mine was 5.7 on a vegetarian low carbohydrate diet. I actually reduced it to 5.7. I thought, okay, now I'm going to start eating meat, and I wasn't even full carnivore. And next blood test, my A1C had gone up to 6. And I couldn't believe it. I thought, okay, was it a mistake to start eating meat? What's happening now? And then gradually started coming back down again.
Yeah.
But that when I saw the 6, when I first started eating meat, and I couldn't understand what was happening. But yes, I think the blood sugar fluctuations are as important. In fact, more important to me personally. They're a lot more important than where my A1C is.
Yeah. The other thing to keep in mind is that there is now good initial evidence in the literature that this idea that we've been talking about, that people who eat carnivore have red blood cells that live longer.
Yes.
It looks like it's confirmed, at least in an initial study. I'll have to dig out the reference. I can let you have that later. But I read something a couple of weeks ago that said, here, look, here is some evidence that it is so. Now, what that tells us is that if your A1C as a carnivore is reading at 6 and above, that's an overshoot, because it assumes your red blood cells have the lifespan of a person eating carbohydrates, and they don't. Ours live longer, ergo there will be more glycation. Right. Where's the time going? I've actually got about 10 minutes left because
we have 10 minutes. I'm really delighted to hear that, by the way. Cool. I'm excited to hear that. So next one. We have 10 minutes. Let's go for this one.
Right.
Now,
lovely.
Insulin can be used in doping.
Yes.
So what is the mechanism behind it, and why aren't we all Tour de France winners?
Right. Okay, so yes, absolutely.
I thought it was banned. Isn't it banned?
It is on the schedule of things that an athlete is not allowed to do, and if they get caught, then, there is an issue. One of the issues, of course, with doping in sport is that the folks who are paid to generate the tests for cheats, the scientists who are doing that work, are generally the same people who are being paid by the cheats to produce the drugs that can't be detected by the tests that they themselves are also inventing. So it's one of those almost self-protecting things. How do you think Lance Armstrong got away with it for so long? Because the same people were lining their pockets from both directions. So yes, using exogenous insulin can be of assistance to athletes in an anabolic way. The risk, of course, is blood sugar management and hypoglycemia, which could indeed lead to problems if it's not monitored very carefully. Yes, it is banned for good reason, safety if nothing else. So there it is. What was the second part of that question?
What's the mechanism? So how is insulin anabolic? So
right.
how does
it
building muscle?
Yep. So insulin acts not only to produce sugar entering the cells or to upregulate sugar entering cells, absent of any other direction from the cells themselves from the inside that lock that out, like the Randall cycle, for example, but also proteins. Proteins enter your cells under the influence of insulin as well. Hence why when you eat protein, it is itself insulinogenic for that reason, to a smaller degree. That's the sleeping policeman versus the great big church steeple situation for sugar. So the mechanism is that insulin is the messenger not only for sugar but also for proteins, which is also why you'll find folks like Stan Efferding, for example, with his vertical diet saying, as an elite muscle building athlete, a hypertrophy athlete, a bodybuilder, we require a whole bunch of carbohydrates in our diet to precipitate that situation. And he might be right. To achieve that level of what I call over-muscledness. Am I saying that that level of musculature is a good thing? No, absolutely not. It's actually clearly demonstrably likely to shorten that person's lifespan and have a deleterious effect on their health status. I'm not suggesting that that's a good thing that a person should do. But what I'm saying is Stan might be right when he says that those athletes cannot achieve those outcomes without that kind of input. That and gear, let's face it. You're not going to get that muscled without gear, and you're also not going to get that muscled unless you're doing basically superhuman lifting kind of stuff. So your average type 1 diabetic who has an otherwise healthy situation other than their diabetes is not going to get jacked by upping their insulin. No, that's not going to work because you need to train and take the gear and mess with your diet and all of that stuff as well. So I hope that covers it off.
Earlier on, I saw another type 1 comment under that question on my page. I can't remember the athlete's, a bodybuilder's name. Apparently, a bodybuilder has said that he's no longer taking insulin because it was making him feel dizzy and shaky. And I thought, well, that's your blood sugars falling. Yeah, that's your blood sugars falling.
Yeah. Oh,
talking of blood sugars falling, my next question is exactly about that, and we'll finish off with that. Right.
Awesome.
Oops. What would Bart consider to be dangerously low blood sugar? I've been down to 3.2, and that's millimoles over a liter now without feeling any symptoms, but then taking a glucose tab out of fear.
Yeah.
And this person, I don't know where he is, but I presume the United Kingdom, where the rule for driving is you have to be at 5. Before driving, which actually is crazy. However, we're going to leave that out and talk about the 3.2. Can someone maybe float around the 3.5, 3.6 mark and be perfectly normal? Is there any danger to it?
The only danger that I can perceive or imagine there is that a person actually is symptomatic of low blood sugar and is in a dangerous situation but does not themselves realize that. Having spoken to a number of type 1 diabetics, both professionally and in my private life as well, almost universally a type 1 diabetic will tell you they know when they're in trouble with their blood sugar. They feel it, they know it, it's not unknown to them. So if the machine says 3.2 and you feel absolutely fine, no sign of any problems, and you can do a quick times table on a piece of paper, back of a napkin or something, and you can respond to someone asking you a question without them going, are you all right? You probably are. The thing with these meters is that they are quite accurate, but not entirely accurate. And also your physiological capacity to perform, for your body to work, also has a range and a variability depending on circumstances. The best clue in my mind is how you feel, and that's corroborated by those around you that say, no problems, I don't think. If it continues to drop lower, obviously you need to pay attention, either to, is there something wrong with this meter, or am I really sliding here? In which case, drop the tab, wait 10 minutes, test it again and see what, if it still says, nah, then you know there's something wrong with the meter, because it would have to come up, for example. There is no rule against you thinking for yourself, I guess, at the end of the day, and being your own physician, pretty much. So I think that's probably a good place to leave it. What do you think?
Absolutely. That actually reminded me of, I think it was Dr. Cahill study, George Cahill. Can't remember when it was, but he gave huge doses of insulin to non-diabetics. He wanted to measure their ketones. And so he brought their blood sugar level right down to 1 point something. I think it was 1.6 or something. I mean, it would never pass ethics now, but this was going back decades. And but these people were perfectly normal. So
yeah, it really depends on your needs for glucose at the time. Keto. Our need for glucose changes vastly. Yeah. All right. Brilliant. All right. As usual, it's not the first time we've chatted, and it won't be the last. A pleasure as usual. I wish you all the best with the Facebook group and the other social medias and all that kind of stuffs. And yeah, all we can do is keep singing the song, and hopefully people will pick up the refrain at some point.
And you're singing it ever so well. I have so much respect for you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to come and share my 5 cents.
Absolute pleasure. All right. See you next time.